I heard Rachel Aaron was making an urban fantasy book based on the Epic of Gilgamesh and Sumerian mythology, and I was immediately on board. I also realized I should probably get this review out soon because it's already been delayed, because Rachel Aaron might just release the sequel before I do. So that was supposed to be a joke, but I'm interjecting real quick here because I kind of looked this up after the fact, and it turns out she's releasing a sequel on October 1st of this year. That's about 3 months between releases. How the hell is she doing this? Anyway, back to the review. So today, we are reviewing Hell for Hire, the first book in Rachel Aaron's new Tear Down Heaven series. Now, since I have gotten a lot of new subscribers since my last Rachel Aaron book, thank you all for that, by the way. Check the iCard for that previous review if you want to know more about this, but let me at least give you some context. Rachel Aaron is one of my favorite authors of the last few years. She generally writes medium-length urban fantasy stories with fun characters and interesting worlds. So I tend to review her books whenever they come out because I think more people should hear about them. This one is a bit late due to the trip I took and some other reviews I wanted to get out, so let's not waste any more time, because as I said, the sequel's already on its way. So, before we go into detail, let's have a quick summary. This will be spoiler-free for the most part, so I'll save most of my spoiler talk for the end. Basically, the arrogant Mesopotamian king Gilgamesh decided he didn't want to die, and being the arrogant prick he is, led his armies to conquer heaven and slay the gods. And somehow it worked, unfortunately. He slew the gods, conquered heaven, became immortal, and enslaved nearly every living demon. Then, being the extra special prick he is, blinded most of humanity to magic and spent the next few centuries destroying basically every magical practice except his own sorcerers and warlocks who rely on him for power. And the Blackwood witches, who are tolerated mostly because it would be a very costly conflict to go into their forest full of monsters and kill them all, and they also have to make useful items, and he wants his court to be happy. Unfortunately for Adrian Blackwood, he has a problem. His choices as a younger child have put his clan in conflict with heaven and made their situation much worse. Determined to stop hiding, he leaves the forest and heads to Seattle in an attempt to fight off the king's encroaching warlocks without putting his family in danger. Unfortunately, his witchcraft will take time to work, even if it is quite powerful, and if he's caught before he's ready, he'll lose. So in order to counteract this weakness, he hires a group of unbound demons led by the mysterious demoness named Bex to protect him while he works his craft. Unfortunately, a powerful warlock puts in motion a plan that he believes will bring Adrian to heel, coming all the way to Seattle from the other side of the country. And that's your basic conflict. So there's actually a lot to unpack in this plot, despite the book only being about 350 pages. To start with, however, I need to talk about Gilgamesh. If you can't tell, I'm actually kind of really excited about this. I love obscure mythology actually becoming pop culture relevant. Now, since many people may know the name but not much else, even if my audience might be slightly more informed about these things, I do think it's worth going over in a bit more detail. Gilgamesh was a semi-demigod-ish king from one of, if not the oldest story in existence. The Epic of Gilgamesh. Again, you've probably heard of it. While I won't go over the entire myth, because it has a bunch of variations, missing pieces, and it's kind of rambly, the main point is pretty simple. Gilgamesh was a demigod, or something very similar. He's described as being 2-part god, 1-part man, and he's a brutal and oppressive king. The gods get tired of his shit, make a wild man named Enkidu, I might be pronouncing that wrong, to kill him. Unfortunately, after the two nearly kill each other, they become friends out of self-respect or something, and go on various adventures until Enkidu is killed by the gods as punishment for their many, many offenses. This causes Gilgamesh to quest for immortality because, oh my gods, I might die one day. He finds several methods, but each time fails just before acquiring it, ending as a mortal who, despite his divine blood and power, cannot escape death. Now, we don't know just how much this myth affects this new book, but if I had to guess, it probably takes place after. Instead of letting death win, Gilgamesh led his army into heaven and killed the gods, claiming eternity in the process. And that is such a cool concept for a story. Unlike many villain adaptations for ancient heroes, you don't even need to change Gilgamesh's character to make it work. He was already a brutal tyrant who regularly fought with the gods for no other reason than he doesn't want things to be like that. And unlike a lot of other mythological characters, there aren't a huge number of adaptations, so you can basically do what you want with the character without having to worry about something else that's already been done. I mean, aside from that franchise, but I'll mention that a bit later. Don't worry, I know that's the big Gilgamesh adaptation. I'll get there, but you basically just have the original myth aside from that. So Rachel Aaron is free to go wild with her world building, and I love it. Honestly, despite the Epic of Gilgamesh being such an important work, and Sumerian mythology influencing so many later cultures, it isn't really used as much as it should be in my opinion. And that is a shame. Shame on you writers. The goddess Ishtar is an absolute badass, and many of her traits had a direct influence on the development of other mythologies, particularly the Greek goddess Aphrodite and the Egyptian goddess Isis. And Gilgamesh is the original story of the man who wants to become immortal, but fails and has to accept his own mortality. And the story really focuses on an angle. Gilgamesh's followers wanting to live forever is a lot of their main motivation. Gilgamesh's actions have heavily shaped this urban fantasy world. Now, I don't have time to go over everything, and that'd be spoilers. However, I will talk about 3 major bits. None of these are major spoilers. They're brought really early in the story. So, let's get into it. First, in this new world, most humans are blind to magic as a direct result of Gilgamesh doing something. It's kind of unclear. Okay, it's vague, it has some implications, but normal people are just described as having scales in their eyes. Whether that's like reptile scales or like balance scales is unclear. These act like the Mist in Percy Jackson, but also a bit like Paradox from Mage the Ascension if you play World of Darkness. Because if you do really, really obvious magic, you get temporarily kicked into the world of Limbo and monsters try and tear you apart for 5 minutes. Second, Gilgamesh slaughtered all but 3 magic traditions. His own sorcerers and warlocks, which rely on his power, and then the Blackwood witches. But it's also implied that there were tons of people who could channel all sorts of magic in all sorts of ways. However, since the only way to not be born with scales in your eyes was to be born in a magically protected area, and Gilgamesh hunted the magic users who could make these areas to extinction, they were slowly lost throughout time. Finally, you have the sorcerers and warlocks. Honestly, they're kind of the opposite of the D&D classes in a lot of ways. Sorcerers and warlocks both draw power from Gilgamesh. The main way they do this is by eating pills of quintessence, which is his own divine power. Sorcerers are basically wizards. They memorize Sumerian hymns and pop quintessence before they cast a spell. Warlocks bind demons rather than making contracts with them like it usually is, by just speaking their true name and stuff. You also have witches. Again, they're the unapproved magic users, and only the Blackwoods are allowed to do that, and only because they live in a very scary forest that Gilgamesh doesn't feel like assaulting. Witches draw upon the power of nature itself, and like there's some sentient embodiment to the forests and that kind of thing. The only reason this is even tolerated again is because, again, forestful monsters and the war between them in heaven would be so costly, it's not worth the benefit. They basically won the war of attrition and now just kind of sit in this eternal Cold War. They also make desired magic items, and Gilgamesh still has a heaven full of followers to please, so he lets them exist. Very begrudgingly, and the warlocks have been aggressively attacking them for a long time. Unfortunately, their force is also surrounded and must regularly make concessions in order for these warlocks to not, attack them whenever they go to the market. Finally, whenever Gilgamesh's presence is felt, he feels overwhelming, and he should too. Because this is the world where the tyrant won. He overthrew the gods, being ruler of the universe. Even the groups he didn't subjugate completely, like Bex's team and the Blackwood Witches, mostly exist because he can't be bothered to spend the time, energy, and resources necessary to fully eliminate them. They're just not worth the effort. And his grasp really does feel absolute. There's a major revelation Bex has during the climax that completely redefines the extent of Gilgamesh's actions, and genuinely has me ask how you even begin to fix what he did. I won't say what it is, but the epilogue almost makes it worse. Honestly, I didn't know Gilgamesh would be that monstrous, which is a huge surprise considering how horrible he is in the source material. The Epic of Gilgamesh basically just calls him a tyrant, and somehow he still was worse. Rachel Aaron really nailed that, and even if we never see Gilgamesh in this book, you get a real feel for him as a character. So if you can't tell, I really like this setting. It takes a few chapters to fully get immersed in it, but once that happens, it's a lot of fun. There are plenty of mysteries, some of which I predicted, others I was genuinely surprised by. It's been a while since the book pulled a few fast ones on me. But that's pretty standard for Rachel Aaron, so time for me to once again explain why I love her books for the 3rd time this year. For my newer viewers, Rachel Aaron is an author who writes loads of urban fantasy stories, and I first found her through the Heartstriker series, which had one of the best settings of all time, the DFZ. In fact, that setting was so good, it had 2 other series set in the same world. I would say Rachel Aaron's main strengths are her settings and characters. She's really good at crafting worlds that feel lived in and compelling. From the lawless, magic cyberpunk city of the Detroit Free Zone to the historical fantasy crystal mining town of Medicine Rocks. Rachel Aaron doesn't necessarily make realistic worlds, but she does make them places where you could see people living in them. The DFZ is a capitalist hellscape where nearly everything is legal, and even when it's not illegal, you have to pay for the cops to show up. But Rachel Aaron shows why people would live there. Basically, all the characters from those stories are down on their luck and looking for second chances. Despite the magic, gods, cybernetics, dragons, people are just living normal lives amongst it all. Mages are offering to clear out magical pests or make wards. The god of noodles opened a ramen shop that has a mile-long wait line, but man is it good. Dragons are flying in the sky on their way to various meetings to bribe people. Dead spirits and their priests run morgues to offer last rites for the lost and forlorn. And hell, the god of the DFZ might just randomly decide a building looks better a few blocks down and move with no warning, and now you're late to work. This is very much present in the world for Hell for Hire. Unlike the DFZ, Seattle isn't that different from its normal version, at least on the surface, and we don't get to see a lot of the world interactions like a city would, like that one is. However, there is, as is typical for urban fantasy, a secret hidden world, which we only get to see in 3 main ways, but they're pretty nice. Bex's Bus, Adrian's Forest, and the Magical Market. Bex's Bus is pretty cool. It's basically a bus with a multi-story interior and a magic autopilot. It's really interesting learning that these things are usually legal for normal sorcerers and like supposed to be reserved for Gilgamesh's upper tier, but she got one from an illicit job. And it says a lot about the corruption among warlocks and sorcerers, and you get to see more of that, obviously. Then we have Adrian's Forest. They treat his witchcraft in a very literal sense. The story actually calls it out a few times. So Adrian's plants in his tree, and he's claiming this grove and slowly farming it out, building places, working the land, carving things, like with actual carving tools. The various tools and description of his work are quite interesting and heavily separate witchcraft from the quick fixes of sorcerers and warlocks. Then we have the market, which is probably one of the most important and one of my favorite scenes. See, Gilgamesh doesn't show up in this book, but his minions do a lot. The market is an overlap between heaven and earth, where those who can no longer live on earth can buy luxuries, and the warlocks and sorcerers can buy valuable items or quintessence. The whole place is understandably filled with propaganda and a demon slave auction, and topping off the whole thing is a statue of Gilgamesh wielding Ishtar's sword and Anu's crown. One of the interesting things we learn is how, despite effectively blinding most of humanity, he still tries to portray himself as a liberator who opened heaven to the masses. So he's, yeah, a self-serving prick. Which, based on most description of Gilgamesh, is pretty on point. Okay, let's just address the thing I know at least one person has been streaming at the stream since I used this image to represent Gilgamesh. It's also kind of interesting from a video creation perspective, so indulge me for a second. When I want to find visuals for a video about a recently released book, I run into lots of problems. Fan art is hard to find for anything that doesn't have a massive fan number, is really new, and as a result, I'm often have to scrounge for promo stuff or anything I can use, really. Mythology is nice because there's a lot more to work with and people have a lot of artwork or older stuff to work with, or at least statues I can find pictures of. Gilgamesh is in a weird place where there's mostly 2 types of art, ancient carvings, and one particular version of Gilgamesh from an anime. So this is the Fate franchise. I'm not going to talk about it too much. It's a massively complex series. The basic story is the Holy Grail grants wishes, mages fight to win by summoning champions from throughout history and mythology, or at least what an anime thinks they look like. Now, I know basically nothing about this franchise. I watched a prequel called Fate Zero, and that's basically it. However, as a result of that, I do know that Gilgamesh was a champion summon and an antagonist in the show and this particular prequel I watched. In fact, I would wager more people probably know about this Gilgamesh than the original myth. So it's not super important, but I did think this was interesting that this was one of Gilgamesh's only major adaptations. I couldn't really find anything else. If anyone else knows of an adaptation I missed, please leave it down in the comments. I would love to hear about it. Regardless of that whole tangent, I am very eager to see the next book in the series. Adrian is a good protagonist, however I do wonder how big a role he'll have in future installments. The story seemed to shift from a strong focus on Adrian and his grove, but we're slowly unraveling Bex's past and the threat of Gilgamesh's heavenly forces, and by the end, Bex is taking a more center stage and is gearing up to take on Gilgamesh again. This was in the summary on the back of the book that she was like a rebel for a long time, so there's not really a surprise there, it's not really a spoiler. But Adrian has a source to take care of now as a result of spoilery stuff. I don't think he can leave. However, that also might not matter, as it's revealed there's more to his past than just clashing with the local warlock groups. It's also revealed the warlocks were acting on behalf of heaven directly, and for some reason they really want Adrian. And after the epilogue, I have some theories that are very unpleasant. At one point, the enemy forces even tried to prioritize capturing him over the demon who's been leading the only semi-successful rebellion effort against them. I also like Bex's crew. You got the Rage Demon, who feeds himself by inciting anger in online video games, the Shape-Shifting Sex Demon, who does exactly what you think, and the Void Demon, who embodies your inner nihilist and can give you an existential crisis by tapping you on the shoulder. In conclusion, if you like urban fantasy stories and want to see an adaptation of Gilgamesh that isn't anime, or just like Rachel Aaron stuff, in which case, hey, I'm a fan too, this new series will be right up your alley. Hell for Hire gets an easy 10 out of 10 for me, surprising absolutely no one who's seen my previous reviews. The audiobook was narrated by Nicholas Kane, who did a good job, so if you prefer to listen rather than read, that's totally an option here. Either way, Hell for Hire was a lot of fun. Can't wait for the next book, which, knowing Rachel Aaron, like I said earlier, it'll be out in a few months. Probably. Interjecting again, she has it in like 3 months afterwards. What the hell? Moving on to the announcements. I'm not sure exactly when this is coming out, so I will either just have finished playing up Elden Ring on the stream, or I'll be finishing it very soon. I will probably finish Elden Ring stream before this video comes out, however. Not entirely sure what's going to be streaming next week, but check out my stream. I play video games from like 7:30 Central Standard Time to around 9:30 or 10:30, depending on how long I want to go, and I do that each Tuesday and Thursday, so check me out. In addition, we have several other reviews coming up soon. The Deadpool Wolverine movie, I'm probably going to have words about that. Either it's going to be really good or I'm going to be really pissed. I am also working on a review for Another Crab's Treasure, and once I finish Elden Ring's DLC, I will probably be releasing a review for that, or at the very least, a short. So I will try and get another book review out before the next Rachel Aaron book to spice things up. There's actually going to be a sequel to Ordinary Monsters. I think it's going to come either right before or right after. That's going to be cool. If you haven't read Ordinary Monsters, I have a really old review about it. I'm not entirely sure I'd recommend you it, but I will try and put it in the iCard. It's a really cool book, so check it out. It's like Necromancy X-Men, but set in the 1800s. But it's not superheroes, it's just like they have mutant powers, but they're all based on like necromancy and death. It's kind of cool. So, yeah. Finally, we have the out card. Click on my subscribe orb, go to my channel, subscribe. It would mean a whole lot to me. I'm so excited we got 200 subscribers, and there's a video YouTube recommends. Click on it, go watch more of my stuff, and I will see you all next time. Bye!